We're live.
Right, thank you, and welcome everyone, and welcome to members of the public who come to watch the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Caleb?
We've not had any apologies for absence, though Councillor Hussain might join us after about an hour.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations, etc. Anybody? Anything to the hand up there? Thank you. Item 3, possible exclusion of the press and public. Press beating down the doors to come and report on again.
No, there's nothing.
Item 4, minutes of the meeting held in January. Does anybody anything they want to pick up on those, please? Any questions? Most of the things crop up later in the agenda now. Thank you. Item 5, Chair's update. One or two things that I just need to tell people about. Item 6 of the minutes that were just approved discusses the reports, the Combined Authority, full Combined Authority decision on what the future arrangements of scrutiny will be, which are not what we recommended, and we'll discuss those later under our own item 6. What it does underline is the contribution that existing members are going to have to make. There's going to be a substantially larger organisation of scrutiny, and the people who've been on it before are going to have the experience that lots of new people will not have. So as far as you possibly can, will you persuade your leaders, parties and councils, to reappoint you to this body, because there's a lot to learn. It's not easily absorbed, and the more experience you have in future, the better. I made that point to leaders when we had a full Combined Authority last week, so we'll probably be disposed to approve that, but please underline it. We need you back again, all of you, please, irrespective of party. Second thing is, Carla and I met yesterday virtually with the chair of the Police and Crime Panel, who is the nearest thing they have to overview and scrutiny on the police side of things, which becomes part of Combined Authority, part of the Mayoral Combined Authority. April the 5th, I suppose, I don't know that. It was an interesting meeting. Scrutiny is the remit of the their police and crime panel, but it's not quite the same as ours, and it's substantially less powerful and has less influence. And their panel has written to the Home Secretary suggesting a review of the powers and strength of the police scrutiny system, and it'll be interesting to see what response they get to that. We don't quite know what they've said. We certainly don't think there's been a reply, but it's interesting that they feel that they need greater influence on the activities of the new police structure. The other interesting that we got out of one of many others was that 18% of the population of West Yorkshire is BME, blind minority ethnic, but only 4% of the police force. So on that calculation, the police is seriously unrepresentative of the population it is trying to police. There is no role for our scrutiny in terms of police and crime matters. Everything that needs to be done under the police existing structure will continue to do that, including the budget and the expenditure monitoring which takes place there. And Angela, I don't think there's going to be any joint resources between ourselves and the police under the new structure at all, is there?
The current plan is all the people currently working within the OPCC, the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, transfer across the Combined Authority so that they can continue to support the arrangements currently in place. We are looking at as you rightly point out, that some of these key committees that help do both the governance and the scrutiny of policing matters. And our starting point is they will continue. There might be some tweaks to the terms of reference, recognising that the change in statutory body from the OPCC across to the Combined Authority. But I hope you heard a similar message from we've heard from the joint audit committee, that the police feel they'd have a role to continue to deliver. What we said we need to make sure is we understand the links between the other panels and committees within the Combined Authority, so that we don't let anything slip between the cracks, and that it may be appropriate to get reports across from different committees to other committees. So we're looking at that, but it's certainly not the right time to try and tear up current existing arrangements that work. It's about tweaking them to fit in. And then I think there'll be some further reviews going forward, and clearly the view of a new mayor who will have a view on some of these matters as well.
Yes, we're not looking for extra work because we haven't got the extra resources yet, but
Indeed.
Fortunately, there isn't any extra work at present. I think the community safety scrutiny chairs in each of the 5 authorities does liaise with the police and crime panel chair. So there is already a link between elected members in the 5 authorities and the police that way. So that closes another door. We're not needed to do anything like that as well. There may be a role for whoever's chair of the corporate scrutiny in future to have regular meetings with the police and crime panel. That depends on who those people are and what the mayor decides. We agreed when I spoke to Councillor Rick Bell that we'll meet again in June after the mayor elections, and everything sorted down and cleared up, and there are no, maybe not, in the new world that exists when we have a mayor. The other thing I've got to report to you on for information is that next week I'm going to be interviewed by the Independent Remuneration Panel. Is that what it's called, Colin? To discuss the activities of the scrutiny and the allowances that are made at present. I have no idea where that conversation will go, and I'll report back when I know any more than that. But that's organised for Monday, I believe. Any questions? Thank you. Item 6 on the agenda: future scrutiny arrangements and structure. Carl, please.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so just to update the committee, on the 9th of March, the Combined Authority met and discussed many things relating to mayoral Combined Authority governance for the future. One of them was scrutiny. The conclusion, ultimately, the members had a discussion and they decided to go with what we recommended. One of the options we considered originally option 2, which was multiple scrutiny committees in future. So the plan, so that's a decision they've made, and the plan is from the annual meeting in June for the next municipal year, there'll be 3 scrutiny committees. The exact remits and responsibilities are still being clarified, but broadly it'll be a corporate scrutiny committee, an economy scrutiny committee, and a transport scrutiny committee. They've decided as well that each committee will comprise of 16 members, 3 from each of the 5 constituent authorities in West Yorkshire, and 1 from the non-constituent authority, which is the City of York. So in total, this will increase the total number of scrutiny members from the current 18 to 48, plus substitutes, so up to 48 substitutes, depending on who the authorities nominate, because theoretically, the member of one scrutiny committee could be a substitute on another, for example. In addition, the Combined Authority approved additional resources, funding for an extra officer to work on scrutiny dedicated. The exact details of that will be fine-tuned in the coming months. I think due to the nature of, we don't want to be going straight from having 1 committee to 3, overnight, as in to resource them. So there's still work to do to implement the new system. So from June onwards, there'll be 3 committees, but how everything else works is still something I think needs to be done in a bit of a phased approach. So we'll be going straight, in May, 1 committee, in June, 3 committee with, all working groups, etc., etc. So once we get the nominations and the members in place, we can start sort of planning on how everything will work in future. The other thing Councillor Aaron's mentioned already is because of the change in the structure, there has to be independent remuneration panel convened, which has happened, and certain members here, the chair, deputy chair, and a few others have been requested to be interviewed by the panel, plus officers, including myself and others, Angela. And I think they're going to report to the plan is for them to report to the April Combined Authority. So that's the decision that was taken. Oh, the last thing, sorry, was I say review, but rather it's more of a sense check in sort of 6 months' time, around about the new year, 2022 new year, to sort of see, how we've landed, how the new system has started, and if there's anything that needs to be added or changed at that point. So the thing I wanted to mention in particular for this committee, if you look at the report, sections 2.15 onwards, is to the 2 paragraphs there remind the committee what the working group identified as being sort of the positives and strengths and potential issues of having multiple committees, and to sort of explain next steps. So, as I said, there's be work ongoing to identify how everything will actually work together. So, for instance, one of the issues that was raised, potential issues of having multiple co-equal committees that are equal without an overarching committee, is that they might fall into sort of silo working and do their own thing. And so, for example, to remedy that, we'll have the 3 chairs at least meeting regularly to make sure that everyone's work programs are, at the very least, the consultant work programs, and make sure everyone's doing what they're meant to be doing in the right place. An issue as well is another potential issue is something like overlapping issues. So, for example, there are lots of issues that will fall into more than one of the 3 categories, economy, transport, corporate, and so there needs to be a way for the chairs to make sure everyone's looking at things from the right point of view. So the immediate next steps, apart from the panel, the remuneration panel, we'll have to draft new terms of reference and remits for the committees. There'll have to be there's obviously a new constitution that's being put together as we speak for the new mayoral authority, and there'll obviously be scrutiny sections and scrutiny standing orders as usual. They'll have to be amended slightly, obviously, to take into account that we've got 3 committees, 3 chairs, and so on. And something I'll be working on is a implementation and induction schedule to essentially ensure there's a smooth transition from the current system to the new system, and make sure that the 30 extra scrutiny members are well supported and properly inducted. An idea there is perhaps, usually we have a meeting in July, a formal committee meeting in July. Might be a good idea for this coming year at least to forego that meeting in favour of more inductions and training, etc., for the new members, because sometimes we get, especially elections in May, often you can get members who are nominated who are not just new to scrutiny or new to the combined authority, but new to being members entirely. So I think giving members some time to settle in and be briefed and brought up to speed, especially considering with the election of a mayor, which is something we new for all of us, not just for scrutiny members. Just give us some time to sort of get into things. But obviously for the current membership, it essentially means that this committee will lapse and be dissolved as of whenever the new committees are set up, which means that the current members, if they're nominated again by their authorities and party groups, will have to be nominated to one of the 3 specific committees. So that's the decision that was taken. So the recommendation is just to note the decision and the implications and next steps.
Thank you. Question, Stephen?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. My concern is how soon are we going to start the process to find a colleague for coloured? I can see it being in June, that we haven't even started, a selection process if we don't push hard for it. I think it's important that this person's up and running as soon as possible when the new members join. So it's they will have a learning curve as well. So it's I guess it's going to be at least 6 to 9 months before that person is at the moment is in post and learnt the ropes of coloured. So I think we've been spoiled by coloured, actually. I won't have him blushing though. You know, and it's important that we do get somebody of that calibre as well, so that we can hit the ground running when things start happening, because I think it's going to be extremely busy when the mayor, whoever it is, comes in. He'll be wanting wholesale, I think, a lot of changes, and there'll be a lot of pressure for us to scrutinise things, in my opinion. So I think the sooner we can get this process started, and I just wondered if Angela could give us any idea of when this process is likely to be completed, and hope, you know, the earliest date when Khaled as a colleague to assist him. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton, is your question on the same lines, or shall we ask for an answer for that and then come back to you?
You can come back to me. That's fine.
Okay. Angela, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the report that the Combined Authority agreed recently was absolutely clear about the resource implications. It set it out clearly, and there was a sum of money put aside in the budget for some of these capacity matters. So the funding is there, the will is there, the approval is there. The team are looking, the government services team are now looking at how to provide that support, how to recruit to it, what the level of skills needed is. You're absolutely right that if we don't start soon, we may not have somebody in post quickly enough, as is often the case. Once we go out to advertising, it will be an external recruitment. These things can take 3 to 4 to 5 months, depending on whether the notice period somebody has to serve or not. Sometimes we've been fortunate and we've got people to start very quickly. Sometimes we haven't. They've had to wait. They've had to work the notice and then join us. But the governance services team are on with looking at progressing this, establishing what the additional role should be, and we're trying to get that moving as quickly as we can. We'll report back. We'll keep the chair informed of where we get to with that. We've got a meeting, I think, in 2 months, so we'll certainly be able to provide an update on progress by then.
Thanks, Andrew. You'll understand and report the concern of members here that we don't spend too long waiting for it. You individual. We do feel strongly about that. Thank you. Councillor Fenton, what's next?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. It was just an observation on paragraph 2.17 in the report. It talks about mitigating some of the issues that were identified. I think the kind of overview of the 3 scrutiny committees in terms of making sure that work is sort of joined up and not duplicated will be important, and it might be worth trying to reflect the role of that group of chairs, or possibly chairs and vice chairs, in order to sort of spread the load and sort of share the knowledge. Might be worth reflecting that in the role of that sort of informal oversight group in the sort of the revised terms of reference for the scrutiny structure going forward. So that'll be important. So I'd be inclined to extend it to vice chairs as well as just chairs, but that's just an observation on that. Thank you.
You note that, Angela, please. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Thank you. Councillor Winard.
Thank you, Chair. This is back to staffing again. I just wonder whether Angela has a view on what the rationale for the suggested staffing increase is, and really is it adequate to actually support 3 committees? Are the scrutiny officers only working on scrutiny work, or will they have other functions within the authority? I'm worried that staffing 3 committees and doing justice to them might be a bigger task than we've budgeted for.
Shall I answer? Yeah. You're right. The report set out, ideally we would be seeking more staff too. Is going to be a challenge to run that level of committees. Again, funding is a challenge, pressures, capacity are challenges. The I think there was a bit of a feeling of, let's do this in a managed way. So the agreement was to increase the support from 1 dedicated officer to 2. Whether we do that over two dedicated posts or 3 posts that together come to 2 because they're doing other things as well. We need to make sure we've got resilience. We need to make sure we can service the pattern of meetings that are put forward. So the approval is for 2. As Khaled said before, the intention is to start not with all 3 committees meeting as frequently perhaps as this committee is, but that's some gradual move into it and a review process in place so we can actually assess, is this possible or not? The level of staffing resource was also mindful of what happens in the other local authorities, and I think there's a feeling it needed to be proportionate alongside what our local authorities provide in terms of dedicated scrutiny support. But it certainly wants to be kept under review. The success of the committee depends on the ability to service that committee from both dedicated scrutiny and from across the wider organisation.
I think it was, Angela, it was just the obvious point that 3 committees and 2 members of staff will raise particular issues in terms of cover when people are off and so on and so forth, and might sort of, just not potentially could fall between 2 stools, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, noted, and I'll feed that back to the team who are managing the recruitment and governance services.
Thank you. Any more questions for Khaled? Oh, Betty, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to comment on the issue that Angela's been answering questions on. Did I understand, Angela, that it's only intended to recruit from outside? Why is there no situation within the ability to recruit within either Leeds, Wakefield, or whatever? Put it out to local authorities to see if there's anybody interested. Therefore, it may reduce the time in somebody being entitled to the post, or applying for the post, I should say. Because with all that's happening, 5 to 6 months, which is usually the time, is not good. And Khaled can't actually, as good as he is, and we appreciate everything that he does, it wouldn't be fair to accept at this point that Khaled should be working there, trying to do what he's doing for all the new committees. So was there any discussion about, and if not, is there the possibility of going back? When one looks at the workload that's going to be involved for the future, is there no possibility of going back in the resources and saying, there's been a discussion at this meeting, the workload that's expected is going to be tremendous for 2 people, taking on board the points of holidays, sickness, etc., that through the chair, the committee is reiterating the need for resources and or to have it that there are 3 officers. I don't think that the way this has been put forward, recognising annual leave, sickness, and the amount of work that's taking place is actually satisfactory to produce, I think, the quality work that Khaled does now, and we would expect from anybody else within the organisation. So 2 points. First of all, not necessarily just extending outward for applications, but I think it's worthy to extend across the local authorities to see if there's anybody interested in the position, which would make it, I think, a bit easier. And secondly, I think the resources that's been allocated are insufficient, and I support Stephen with his comments, and I think they all ought to be put together and go back to whoever, through the leaders, and if the leaders themselves put forward a case that this is not going to be sufficient to deal with the increased workload.
Okay. Shall I answer those, Chair?
Please.
Okay. On the first point, in terms of recruitment, when we recruit, we tend to advertise externally. We also send it specifically to our local authority partners, so it's brought to their attention. What we found sometimes before is if we do it to a smaller group and we don't get response, it then takes longer in the long term because you've then got to re-advertise and go elsewhere. but we do very much try and promote these sort of opportunities amongst our partners. We have had some vacancies in our governance services team, and good governance services and scrutiny officers are hard to come by. So they're difficult to entice away from the places where they work. There's also we then leave you all with a problem if we do take somebody from one of your authorities. So we probably get the best overall result if we advertise externally, but fully wide recruitment campaign. But we will make sure local authorities are particularly signposted on it. In terms of the overall resource, I think the decision of the Combined Authority was clear that they wanted a graduated lead into this, and we're happy to support two officers to do that. We can certainly feed back as we're going through the process of agreeing the terms of reference of the committees, the timescales, the meeting frequencies, that if they want the full scale of what is set out in that report, that the committee believes that takes more than the two resources that they have approved. So I'll make sure that is flagged.
Appreciate that, Chair. I think the thoughts in my head were not actually recruiting the very scarce scrutiny officers that we have. And Wakefield has 2 within 3, and I think that wasn't in my head. I think if it's going to be promoted, that it should be promoted as a career development as well for other people who may be in administration that might want to have a change of job. I don't think the intention is ever to take from other authorities, because they are very rare. And in the phased approach in producing the work of the 3 committees, I think it's important that at the beginning, it's laid out that this committee chair has discussed these issues in terms of the future. We welcome the extra resources that's been allocated at the moment, but as we're phasing the work in, we are at the moment conscious that there are and maybe elements in the future like holidays and sickness where the work that's phased in will not even be able to cope. Because I'm sorry, but I really do think that we've got to lay a position down now for the future. Too often it's seen as, well, you've been doing it in the past, so why can't you continue doing it? Well, I think we've just got to lay our position down now in order to come back and readdress it in terms of the concerns that we have for appropriate cover during holidays and sickness. And I do think, Chair, that ought to be the response that we give. And I do feel strongly on this because there's a lot of work coming in for people. We don't know yet the amount. We're actually we're working in the dark at the moment, but we all can see that it is going to be extra. And I think we ought to lay a position down now rather than later on. And then somebody will say, well, we've no money left in the budget. So I really do want to enforce that point. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Betty. That's priceless. Thank you. We'll have to take your advice in a moment, Angela, whether we actually pass a resolution summarising what Betty just said, which I think we will all subscribe to, or we make sure that the minutes of this meeting significantly reflect this debate, because I don't think there's much dissent from this. Christine, in the corner there.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, shall I just say, first of all, that I totally agree with what Betty has just said, and I think it is necessary to have 2 more posts. And on that, if local authorities are likely to be rationalising the roles of their staff, would it not make sense to offer this post to anybody who might be facing that situation? Maybe that they could assimilate over, or be given the first opportunity of a post like this. Thank you.
Again, Angela, come to you, please.
I think, I mean, if anyone, we're not aware of any authorities reducing their governance teams, but if they are, please do let us know, and we'll happily pick that up. We do talk regularly to the other governance services teams across the West Yorkshire authorities. So I'll make sure our head of governance services picks that up and asks that question. That's obviously something we don't like. We don't want good skills within the local authority family to disappear. So happily pick that up. I think in terms of your question about a resolution or a how to make this, how to take this forward, I clearly have heard the message and we'll take that back to the team who are doing the recruitment. Certainly would be helpful to capture at the minute, and I wonder whether it's something the chair might wish to raise when the chair has his discussions with the combined authority chair.
I'll certainly do that. Betty again.
Chair, I'm very sorry. Do forgive me. I'm not just only addressing the vacancy that will, not a vacancy, the appointment that will come up for this extra post, going to the governance of each authority. After all, when one looks back within the scrutiny process that happened, there wasn't officers just floating about in governance. There were actually administrative posts who at the time did a very good job in the changeover and actually accommodating the role of scrutiny. And I think Christine is right. Let's just apply to the governance department of other authorities out there. We have changes, lots of authorities are changing. We have excellent admin posts that may want to see this as a career adventure in scrutiny. So I think it should be widely publicised across the authorities outside of just the governance departments to enable people to see this as a career progression chair.
Very sensible, thank you. David? Christina, your hand's still up, but is that an old hand?
It's an old hand, sorry, Peter. Take it down.
I can't find mine.
Thanks, Peter. I fully concur with everything that's been said with regards to the whole process of the appointments. Is there also room for also considering how the two-way relationships will go between the scrutiny officers in the combined authority and those who are operating within local authorities? Because, obviously I know that there are ongoing discussions between certainly ours and I assume therefore the other four with obviously scrutiny, but I think with the increased number of committees, then this is going to be, I think, even more important that there is sort of common ground and common agreement between the effectively 6 structures. Now, it may well be that there's less in terms of commonality, but there is a danger that each authority follows its own scrutiny procedures. And I think that given the obviously the developments that are now taking place, I think it will make it more complex. And I think, therefore, we possibly do need to have a clear protocol with regards to how the two sections actually work together, support each other during this early period, but obviously ongoing, because I think it is clear that it does have to work really well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure that's noted. Well done. Thank you. James, I see your hand now.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. I think there's been some really good comments on this. I think this is a really good opportunity to reset scrutiny in West Yorkshire with the new mayor coming in. We're not going to have a opportunity like this again to really change how things are done. And a lot of the issues that we touched upon about how it's hard to find good scrutiny officers, hard to recruit them and how valuable they are, but also how we kind of need experienced members and people engaged with scrutiny. I think underlying all of that is a real need for us to kind of have a look at all of scrutiny in West Yorkshire, how we all work together and actually create more of a sense of an expertise, a pool of knowledge that we share amongst scrutiny officers, among the local authorities and the combined authority, and amongst councillors involved in it. So whether that's some kind of West Yorkshire Scrutiny Network, I know Callie's spoken about how officers collaborate across West Yorkshire on things, or whether it's a kind of yearly scrutiny conference or more opportunities to get together and collaborate. I think that's really important, because some of those staffing issues and shortfalls, there's nothing to stop officers, helping each other out between different authorities or working more collaboratively on things, doing joint scrutiny with different local authorities and doing joint scrutiny across the scrutiny panels that are being set up for the combined authority. Because by doing that, it allows you to have that really thematic and holistic approach on a particular topic across the whole area, and then you can do that around whatever the mayor's political agenda is once they're elected, and and kind of reset that culture. I also think there's a bit of a need to reset the culture between Scrutiny and the combined authority members and the leadership itself. I think too often it's felt a little bit like we're kind of whistling in the wind as a Scrutiny panel, and we suggest things or make recommendations and they don't always get picked up. And I think to illustrate that, you know, the way in which we did a detailed Scrutiny review or what we thought Scrutiny would be like, and then they've just kind of picked something completely different. I mean, that's their choice, but I think it does illustrate how there's quite often a divide between the thinking, and if we're going to be effective in Scrutiny, I think we also need to reset that culture on the combined authority as well, and try and develop an approach where we're speaking to them and engaging a lot more readily in what their forward plans are, what the issues they are that they want to look at, and where we can actually have added value in terms of wider engagement and being a kind of a critical friend to the Mayoral combined authority as well. So I think I am an optimist. I think there are some good opportunities here with more members being involved, a greater, you know, attention to Scrutiny, but, you know, the staffing issues, absolutely, and, you know, helping to create that more expertise amongst staff, collaborating with each other and increasing their knowledge, and the same with Scrutiny members, I think, across all of West Yorkshire, is something we should all give a bit of attention to.
Thank you. Quite important. Yes, I understand. Any other members wish to contribute? Important debate. Just clear my mind, Angela. When there are 3 separate scrutiny committees, will all 3 chairs have to be of a different party from the mayor?
Yes.
So there's no political balance on that or anything like that. We're all.
No, the arrangements currently that apply for one committee equally apply to however many committees there are. So it is a opposition chair.
Thank you. I can't see any more hands, so the recommendations at the end of this report are that we just note the combined authority decision and the implications on Scrutiny, and the minutes are going to reflect the strong feelings among members of this group that resources are critical and we can't stagger along as we are at present. Thank you. Item 7, mayoral election preparations, and we go to Angela.
Thank you. Yes, you have been asking us about the preparations for the mayoral election over the last few meetings, and we agreed to bring back a bit more of a detailed paper this time. I think since we last met, there's probably been a little bit of a movement towards the elections look more likely to happen than not. I think last time there was still some doubt, but all the activity and the actions now are very much focused on ensuring a safe election can be held on the 6th of May. As part of that, Cabinet Office have updated their guidance, and there had been concerns about people not being able to campaign properly during the run-up to this election due to COVID, but there have been some changes to the regulations that allow some campaigning to take place in a COVID safe way. So that is helpful. The work to make sure polling stations are safe places to attend continues. Local authorities are all putting in place appropriate measures which are being risk assessed, which are being tested by their health and safety officers, and they're ensuring that a polling station will be a safe environment for people to go to. You're probably also aware that postal votes are being, people are being reminded of the ability to take up a postal vote if that makes them feel safer and more secure about voting in the election. The report picks out on paragraph 2.4 about candidate engagement. The closing date for nominations is actually the 8th of April, but you'll all be aware that a number of the parties have already announced who their candidate will be. They still have to go through the nomination process, but paragraph 2.6 there sets out the names that have been put forward by some of the parties to date. We are already doing some engagement with candidates, so Leeds Council are leading briefings on the practicalities of the process, because they are we have appointed Tom Reardon, Chief Executive of Leeds Council, as the returning officer for the election, so it is his responsibility to ensure due process and a proper election is run, and obviously has a huge amount of experience at having done this for local and regional elections in the past. We're also doing some briefings more about what the combined authority is, what the mayoral role and remit is, and those engagements are underway. We are ensuring that we are even-handed in managing candidates and information to them, and there is a dedicated area on our website for them to ask for information and for us to share it back. We have talked before about the statutory booklet that has to go out to every household, and you've all raised a number of concerns about, is this the most environmentally sustainable thing to do? What can we do about that? And we have stated about the legislation. It is absolutely clear that this has to be a booklet that has to be mailed out. We included some details in the paper about the sustainability and environmental policy of the printers that are being used, which hopefully provides some reassurance that we're doing this in as sustainable a way as we can. The booklet will contain factual information about how to vote, how the election, what the mayoral election looks like. It will include the registered, the nominated candidates, and there is also the ability for each candidate to put in a little mini manifesto. Within there are prescribed limits and legal requirements about what can and can't be part of that, but that is an option to them. And paragraph 212 sets that out, and that there is a fee attached to that in line with the approach taken in all other mayoral areas. I think that probably takes the end of the report. So the appendices do set out some further information about the printer and their approach to printing the booklet, and it will be being mailed out from the 16th of April onwards. I will pause at that, happy to take any comments or questions from the committee.
Questions, please. I was at a meeting. Has somebody got a hand up? I was at a meeting earlier this week at which Tom Reardon said that the number of postal vote applications received in Leeds this year so far was equivalent to the number of people who voted last year. So, and there's weeks to go yet, so it's going to be a different electorate if people are going to respond on that volume. And the organisation of the count is going to take, I don't know, days and days, isn't it? Which is going to be counted first, the mayor elections or the local elections?
No, you're right about the postal votes, and I heard a similar figure from Leeds. I think they've doubled the number of people registered for a postal vote already. I don't have figures to hand from the other local authorities, but I suspect they will be showing some similar picture. In terms of the count is being spread out over the whole of the weekend. There are lots of elections this year because last year's were postponed. It means some of the elections that only take place in alternate years all fall this time. So there's a large number of parish elections, local council elections, and the mayoral election, which are all being run as almost little mini elections within one big one. So they're all being run in the same way. You'll just get a number of different ballot papers when you turn up to vote. The count that is going to take place over the whole of the weekend. They will be starting with the parish and local elections. The mayoral count will be on the Sunday, and so we will know the outcome of the mayoral election on the Sunday, the 9th of May, with the mayor taking up PCC responsibilities and the other mayoral responsibilities from the 10th of May.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, in anticipation. It's a hell of a job. Any more questions or anything?
Peter, could I ask about, we mentioned postal votes. Postal votes are likely to start going out in the middle of April. So, and you said that the booklet is going to be mailed out on the 16th of April. It may well be that the booklet arrives after some people have already received their postal votes, in which case some people may have already voted before having the benefit of being able to read the booklet. I just wonder whether, ideally the booklet could have been distributed slightly earlier than the middle of April.
And unfortunately, the nominations close on the 8th at 5 p.m. on the 8th of April. So there is very limited window there in order to actually get the final proofing of the booklet. It goes to print that weekend, beginning of that week, and it starts actually, it goes out in it's a staged posting out, and it will start with postal voters for exactly the reason that you've set out. So we're doing our best to get it to postal voters as soon as we can. And I think we'll just have to try and hope in the messaging that we make it clear that there is further information that will be mailed out to people. and hope people will sit on that vote for at least a few days to be able to work through the information. There clearly will be, there'll be information on our website and on local authority websites as well in advance of that date, as there is now.
Thank you. Rachel?
Thank you, Chair. At a previous one of these scrutiny meetings, I asked about postal votes and how people would be informed of their right to have one and how to get one, and I was told that it wasn't the responsibility of the combined authority. So do you know if across all the local authorities, people are all being informed in the same way and encouraged in the same way to take up their right to a postal vote, or are there any discrepancies there? And my other question was, are all the local authorities in the West Yorkshire combined area holding local elections at the same time, or just some of the authorities?
If I take those in turn, firstly, you're absolutely right. The managing the voting arrangements is down to the local authorities. My understanding is all the local authorities have engaged with those registered to vote. There's lots of messages going out as well about encouraging people to register to vote, but clearly that's being put out through social media and other means to try and remind people of that. There are local elections in every district, in every local authority this year.
Okay, Rachel. Rachel, happy with that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
James, his hand is up.
Thank you. I think the point made about the time scale between people getting things in elections and voting by post is a really good one, and it's a bigger issue than just us as a combined authority, because actually electoral administrators they have it in their mindset that they want to send out the postal votes as soon as possible to get it done, and they've got pressure like never before this year to get out all the postal votes. Yeah, it really doesn't give voters very much time between close of nominations on the 8th and postal votes landing to actually have an election campaign, especially in a situation where we haven't legally been able to even deliver leaflets until, when was it, the 8th of March or whatever, in the rules changed. Yeah, so there isn't much time for people to actually get information and make an informed decision. It is good that we're encouraging lots of people to get postal votes, but there is a huge cost to this as well. A lot of authorities across West Yorkshire have sent out letters to every single voter, some of them with free post address replies, so there will be an astronomical amount of money having been spent on that postal vote recruitment as well. And we do have to be mindful that when you talk to voters, a lot of them say they want things like their potholes fixed and their roads done, rather than to be sent a letter about whether they want a postal vote or not. So I'm always in two minds about that, because I do believe everyone should vote and encourage them to do so, but I'm also mindful of the cost to taxpayers when we send out lots and lots and lots of direct mail to them, especially because we're sending out the booklet as well, and you wonder if the booklet could have had something about getting a postal vote included in it, and we could have killed two birds with one stone there. Perhaps. I was really pleased though to see the environmental sustainability report with the booklet, and it's nice to see that it's going out not with single-use plastic polythene wrapper. It's going to have a kind of recyclable wrapper on it, because it is 1.7 million copies. So obviously getting the sustainability of such a large order is good. And I think actually if you read that document, it does counter some of the myths you sometimes hear about leaflets not being sustainable, or the print industry not being sustainable, because a lot of the forests are, they replant the trees for the trees that they take down, so it is a kind of sustainable industry in that regard. So I was kind of pleased to see that in the report as well. Just in terms of the West Yorkshire mayoral ballots, are they all going to be like the same colour across West Yorkshire? Because obviously this year people are going to have possibly parish elections, they might have 2 elections with by-elections occurring, and the mayoral. So there's going to be a lot of different ballot papers, and of course people are going to be using 2 different voting systems as well. They're going to be using the supplementary vote for the mayoral. Although I did know it might be the last time they ever do that, because the Cabinet Office is saying they're going to change it to first past the post again. But are we doing a bit in the booklet that actually explains how people vote in the election as well? Because not everyone will be used to being able to vote for a first and second preference, will they?
Shall I respond to that? Yeah, thank you. You're right about the dates. It's been a real challenge. The dates are outside of our control. The only one we can try and control is doing things as quickly as we can once those deadlines hit. And you're right, the local authorities have wanted to encourage people to register for a postal vote in good time, which does run the risk, therefore the postal votes are all set up before all the information is out there. There is information out set on our websites, and you'll probably start to see more information going out trying to raise awareness of the election. In terms of your question about the colour of the ballot paper, you're right, there will be a consistent approach across all 5 local authorities. So whichever authority you're in, the ballot paper for the mayoral vote will be the same colour. I'm trying to recall what colour it is, but that's been agreed up front. So there will be consistency for the voter experience. The booklet, to confirm, does contain information about how the voting works in terms of a first and second vote, and so it does set out some information, and I think some of the authorities are looking to give further information out through their website about helping people through it, because you're quite right, there's potentially 3 votes that people can cast in one go, and want to make sure people understand the difference between them and how they operate. So yes, that information is in the booklet.
Super, thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. You think it'd be like Mr. Trump, if he didn't win, he used to run the electoral registration office, says, "Can you not find me another 11,000 votes?" And you wouldn't think that, would you? The report just asks us to note the contents of the report, so I think we're doing that. Thank you. You understood the points made, which are all based on experience and directly relevant. Thank you. Item 8, is it now? Item 8, page 39. Budget, gain share and corporate performance. And who do we ask to talk about that?
It's me again.
Yes, I thought it might be, yes.
Yeah, I'm not doing the next item after this though. This is my last one of the day. This is usually you do get a report most meetings about some of the corporate matters. So this is the update on where we are, the corporate plan, budget, risk management, and we've also included some information on gain share that you asked for at your last meeting. So just running through it briefly in order. The first section at 2.1 is around a reminder of the corporate plan. So we have a plan in place for this year. There's a number of KPIs, key performance indicators that we're monitoring, and Appendix 1 sets out progress against those. They are generally doing well. So that's some good progress in the year. There is a new corporate plan being put together, still following the same strategic objectives, but obviously the actual things we are doing in the coming year will differ. That is in preparation and will be coming forward soon. Paragraph 2.4 onwards refers to corporate risk, and the strategic risks are set out in the Appendix 1 as part of that performance report. There are a number, the Governance and Audit looked at this yesterday, so they endorsed some of the additional risks we've added. There are quite a few red risks, but there's hopefully also some narrative about what we're doing to mitigate those risks. It is a reflection, I think, of the difficult world in which we live today. Para 213 sets out the revenue budget position. This reflects what went to the Combined Authority last month. There's been little change since then in terms of the budget position. So we are looking at a balanced position for this year. We have put forward a balanced position for next year, but with many caveats around that. There are some savings still to be identified, which we're working through. There is a lot of flux in the bus industry. Government has published its approach to bus strategy, enhanced partnerships, etc. And so that there's quite a lot of work to be done around what the bus industry looks like in recovery and our role in that with the funding that we have secured through the transport levy. And paragraph 220 sets out the decisions that have been made by the Combined Authority during the current financial year in terms of approving gain share. So this year's money is approved and allocated. There's some specific approvals still to come, but there's an in principle or an actual decision for all of it. For next year, 21-22, an element of the gain share was agreed as part of the budget setting process to support the elections and the setting up of the mayoral office. There is still obviously most of next year's gain share to be allocated, and combined authorities agreed that will be done via the processes we're setting up for the single investment fund. They had a paper on the principles of that at their meeting in earlier this month, and there'll be further papers coming forward in April and June to progress that. The appendices set out the budget positions, and I'll probably pause there and happy to take questions on any aspect of corporate performance in its widest sense.
Chair.
Your hand is up first, yes, thank you.
Angela, the corporate risk summary, risk, the second risk down, CRRSD2, there is a risk that there are challenges to disruption in the way the combined authority provides services, essentially because of Brexit and Brexit disruptions. Could you unpack that for me? Because it seems to me that the some of that risk is actually now dissipated, and I'm not quite sure why it still remains a red, very high risk.
It's part of it. You're right. Some of it has crystallized and some of it hasn't. So there are things, for example, around the legislation, around the procurement regulations that hasn't been resolved. There's still this debate of how state aid works when there's not the European wrapper to it. So there's a number of things that are still being worked through. We're using European rules, but we know they are due to change or going to change. So I think there's still a feeling that there's still some of the legislation to sort out. I think it's also the impact on business has probably been more difficult to see because of COVID laid on top of it. And one of our roles is supporting business, and our growth hub, our business support desks are helping as best they can, but they are, again, because all the legislation isn't fully set out, all of the ways of working aren't there. That creates some difficulties for them. So I think we felt it was still a risk in terms of some of the services we deliver, some of our contracting that we undertake. Hopefully it will mitigate down over the year.
I'm sure it's a risk, but critical, I'm not quite so sure about, but that's just my view.
I'll feed that back to the team, and we'll have a look at that before next time.
Are you reassured by that, Jeff? I don't think you are you?
Well, I've heard what's been said, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I know what that means, yes, thank you.
We will review that one for you.
Thank you. James, you're on mute, but it's your turn.
Super, thank you. Yeah, just picking up on the points there about the kind of COVID risks being high. I just wondered, as we kind of look to the future, I really hope for like one lesson from this pandemic is actually all of global society takes the risks of pandemics as something that can reoccur more seriously, because we've seen actually this is like the biggest financial and social and cost of lives hit we have had since World War II, and we know from throughout history they are a reoccurring thing that does happen to humans, and with climate change and with increased global transport and increasingly humans kind of living nearer to animals due to the kind of population pressures and stuff, that risk is going to be higher moving forward. And I wonder if there is more of a role that the combined authority have in terms of future preparedness, looking at things like the PPI shortages we had, in terms of actually do we need to look at kind of domestic production for some of this equipment in the future, because we could hopefully we're coming to the end of a COVID pandemic, but we could have a flu pandemic in 2 or 3 years time, God forbid. But it is a realistic risk of something that could happen. And I wonder, when we kind of come up with these corporate risk registers, are we kind of working with the Resilience Forum and the other combined authorities in terms of our local government strategic risk, kind of being prepared for these eventualities? I know from, I do a lot of this in Coldale Council, I always bang the drum about being prepared for these unlikely but high impact disasters that can occur. Climate change is one of them. Flooding is one we have quite frequently in Calderdale, but the evidence really is that if you are well prepared for this sort of thing, you can really, mitigate the impact through a little bit of planning and thoughtfulness. So I I'm pleased to see, you know, the current COVID stuff is on the risk register, but I think there needs to be something around, you know, preparing for future pandemics as well afterwards.
Thank you. Angela, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I will just agree there. We do work with the local resilience forums. We are working with other parties across West Yorkshire who have probably more frontline role in responding to some of the impacts of pandemics. I think probably the last year has shown that the more we do that collectively, the better the outcome. But I will pick up specifically whether it's something we want to flag in our partnership working. We're doing some work around how we do.
Yeah.
What are the best ways for us to work with local authority partners and wider? And I think that's probably a good theme for us to make sure we pick up. So
Thanks. Yeah, and it's aligning the industrial strategy as well. I was chatting to somebody who sets up PPE factories, and they went and set one up in Madrid, and they've just got it up and running now. But it's kind of taken them, you know, it takes 6-7 months to get the machinery in there and set up the factory. But wouldn't it have been great if we'd been able to like make more of the PPE that we needed within West Yorkshire and give people local jobs to produce that? And going forward, if we know that it's going to be something that might be required again in high demands, it'd be nice if we were able to manufacture it here in West Yorkshire rather than buying in some of the stuff we got in, you know, from other countries. Some of it was of dubious quality as well.
You're right. That was something we looked at last year when there was the immediate crisis around getting PPE. I'll make sure we pick that up again and make it's in our planning for next year.
Okay, James. Any more questions to Angela on budgets? Can I just ask a question about gain share, which is either too good to be true, or I just don't understand gain share. Is it possible that decisions on expenditure can be made by a mayor independently without having to persuade anybody else?
Not on gain share, no.
No, all right. On anything else?
The mayor takes decisions on policing matters. The policing decisions are a whole separate category of decision making. But
we've established that's nothing to do with us, but all right. But
everything else, no, the mayor does not have any unilateral decision making on expenditure.
That's reassuring, thank you. Any more questions, Angela, on this? All right, thank you very much. You can go home now, Angela.
Thank you.
Item 9, which is not Angela. Is Liz here? Oh, there you are, Liz. Over to you. Mass transport. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So just introduce myself. I'm Liz Hunter. I head up the transport policy team in the Combined Authority. I'm also joined today by Farah Tam, who works in the communications team. So we obviously have shared the paper with you around our connectivity plan. If I may, Chair, we've got a couple of slides. So shall I talk you through some of the headlines of the plan? Would that be helpful for the?
What we don't allow is people presenting these papers and then reading them out, which just gets my blood pressure. If you show some slides, that's fine. Thank you.
I'll try to not repeat then, although some of you may have seen some of this because we are trying to engage widely on these plans. So I will run through them very quickly because it'd be great to get onto the conversation.
We all go to meetings which are designed for people who can't read because it makes my blood boil. Over to you.
Can I just check? Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Excellent. So we just thought we would talk you through the kind of makeup of the plans themselves, and then show you a few graphics of what's in the documentation. So the connectivity infrastructure plan for West Yorkshire has been published for engagement. That's open till into April. And what we've been trying to do is set out the long-term transport infrastructure needs of the region. It's very much based on a number of different more detailed publications covering rail, a bus network review, we've got local cycling and walking plans, there's a mass transit vision, we've also got a draft future mobility strategy, and all of these have been also underpinned by a number of case for change reports with a lot more detailed evidence, because the plans are very much based on the evidence around a number of different kind of corridors, looking at employment, housing growth, etc. So that's the kind of introduction to the plans, and all of those documents are on the website and open for people to have a look at. As I said, it's very much evidence-based, and this is the first time that as a combined authority we have brought together in one place the data, very much built upon local authority data. So this is not new housing data by any means. This is what the local authorities have in their own plans, but we brought it together into a West Yorkshire approach so that we can properly consider the transport implications, both of what's here currently and also where the future growth is. We've also been really keen to map where we have some of our most deprived communities, and you can see some of that on the map. I want to highlight 3 of the challenges that we see through this work, and also for us trying to understand what the future transport implications might be. So obviously COVID, and I'm sure there's been many discussions around the impact of COVID on travel patterns going forward. We continue to try and understand those, and we've done our own research through transport surveys to understand people's perceptions and current travel habits. But obviously there's still a lot of uncertainty about what might happen as people return to offices, and how people might want to do things differently in the future. So this is certainly something we know we need to come back to as we develop the plans further, and keep making sure that we test it and test our plans against what people are actually doing and their travel behaviours. Really keen to make sure that we, as I say, are inclusive in the plans, and those communities that have suffered from poor connectivity in the past have been part of the evidence base and part of the plan that we've developed. And thirdly, around the climate change agenda, it's been a really key part of the plan to see how our carbon pathway work that we have done to see how we're going to meet our carbon target of 2038 can be met. Transport, as you know, is the largest emitter within West Yorkshire, so we need to really do some quite innovative and bold things to try and bring those emissions down. Technology will help, but it won't do everything, so we really see an important role for people getting on bikes, walking more, and using our public transport network. So that has been the kind of key part of the plan. Part of also the reason for doing it now, as it says here around investment, you may have seen that the budget a couple of weeks ago reconfirmed plans for mayoral combined authorities to have access to a new transport settlement. They're calling it the Intercity Transport Fund. This is a £4.2 billion pot, which is available from 2022 onwards, that the 8 mayoral authorities will be able to work with government on over this year to have access to that. So we've been really keen to start to develop a pipeline of interventions so we can be ready to have that conversation with government. So within the documentation, hopefully you may have looked at some of this, so I won't go into detail, but we do in the document share some of the challenges within different areas, and take a kind of step-by-step approach through the region. So like I say, this is the first time we've brought all this information together into one place. And then all of the data that has gone into these maps around where the challenges are and the future opportunities are has led us to then think about the right modes for how we connect places in the future. So we've been really focused on having walking and cycling at the kind of at the heart of what we've been trying to do as a first choice for short journeys. I know people do cycle for longer journeys, but we recognise that we are trying to find a way to enable some of those more shorter journeys to be made by cycling and walking. The bus is definitely at the heart of our plans. I think Angela already mentioned the National Bus Strategy published this week, and we're making progress on working with the operators. But certainly further bus priority will be a kind of key theme of our plans going forward. Rail, as shown by the map on the right-hand side, is really currently our form of mass transit for the region, and we are really keen to see government investment in the Transpennine route upgrade, in particular coming forward, but also NPR, HS2, and we're working on the rail vision sets out a number of aspirations that we want to see for the entire rail network, across service frequency, station accessibility, etc. So rail really kind of the current backbone of our mass transit proposals, but then we are also suggesting a new form of mass transit to provide some of the missing links within the transport system, and I'll come back to that in a moment. We completely recognise that cars and vans will still be important, but we think and hope they may be used less given our promotion of public and active travel. And also we recognise the role of national and international connectivity as well. So all of this has then led to us creating a kind of single map where we try and bring together all the different modes, where we look at how we can best connect our places in the future. Like I said, this is all online, so if you want a kind of detailed look at the map, you can do so. But this is again the first time to bring together in one place where we think the opportunities are for connectivity. Obviously, at a very local level, we still want to see investment in local places, and we haven't put that on the map because we see that, you know, we see what that needing to be in all of our neighbourhoods and communities. So I'll keep going and then have to come back to questions. Just wanted to touch briefly on the mass transit proposals, because this is one of the newer aspects of our work, where we want to see a kind of new, greener and more inclusive approach to how we might develop our mass transit proposals, and this is very much at a West Yorkshire level. So we have we've been basically looking over the last year or so about the different modes of technology that we might be able to use to plug some of these gaps in our transport network. So within the documentation, there are examples of the different types of technology that we could look at. Some of these corridors, from advanced rapid transport, bus transport, through to light rail, tram train, and ultra light rail. A lot of this was based on a worldwide market testing exercise that the team did, where they invited suppliers, manufacturers, kind of anybody really who could give us the latest information on technology. And again, that's published on the website and is really going to help us think about the right mode for us and some of the challenges that maybe we and other places have had with some of the infrastructure. We hope we might be able to mitigate through using the advances in battery operated technology in particular. So some really interesting ideas hopefully coming through there. We haven't decided on the right technology for the right corridors yet. Part of the engagement is to see whether we're connecting the right places, and then we can get into whether and what the right technology is. So again, this is in the documents. This is the map around mass transit and where we think there is potential for some of the corridors to be looked at in the future. So within the mass transit document, we then take each of these corridors and give a view about the places to connect on there, thinking about the role of park and ride, thinking about how the key places within those centres and how to connect them, for example, hospitals and universities. So there's much more detail in the document that we're seeking people's views on. We're also really keen to make sure that our plans around mass transit have really great design from the start. So recognising that obviously this is all about people and moving people, so we have to have a people first approach. We certainly want to be environmentally responsible in the way that we design and build the mass transit system, and also recognise that hopefully trying to move more people through this new form of public transport will also help our carbon targets. Obviously the whole point of this is to be better connected, but it's how we integrate then any new mass transit system with what we have currently, thinking about ticketing, and like I say, how we enable people to access mass transit through walking and cycling and connections into the bus and rail network, so it's a much more seamless journey hopefully. And of course we want to celebrate West Yorkshire through the plans as well. So there's an awful lot more work to be done on how we develop these principles, but interested in people's kind of views and reflections on them. And then lastly, I thought I would just mention around kind of what's next. So very much the consultation is live at the moment, and we are seeking views, as I say, across all the different elements of the plan, and we can come back to some of the activities if you're interested in more detail around that. We are doing things like webinars. We've taken the presentation to each of the district subcommittees, where we've invited all councils to attend. And we're doing a lot of social media to try and promote people to the website to interact. And like I say, the next steps around the work is following the engagement and consideration of what people have said to help us build this pipeline of interventions so that we can be ready for government funding to try and make these plans into reality and to make them deliverable. So Chair, that's a very quick counter through, but I thought I would highlight some of the things that's in the documentation in case people haven't had the chance to read them yet. I'm more than happy to take your questions, take your feedback, or take your views about it. Yeah, over to you, Chair. I'll stop sharing.
Are you going to delete the PowerPoint?
Yeah, give me a sec. Has that worked?
That's fine, thank you. What questions? Rachel first.
Thanks. I've got a few, if that's okay. My first one was that I didn't see any mention of York on those slides, and I know York isn't strictly part of West Yorkshire, but that transport link to York is very important for York's economy and the rest of the West Yorkshire economy. Lots of people travel between York and Leeds and the rest of West Yorkshire for work, for visiting family, for leisure, for all sorts. So I think it's important to include York in there if possible. Would it be possible for you to send those slides to Khaled to distribute to all of us, please? Because it was very small on the screen and difficult to read. And I know you said the information's available online, but it'd be really handy to have it sent directly to us if that's okay. Thanks.
Yes,
I had some questions about, in the report, you talk about some webinars that are coming up soon for engagement. So I was just wondering kind of what sort of engagement it is. Is it kind of informational, primarily to inform people of the plans and what's going on, or is it a true consultation exercise? And I had some questions about who you're expecting to come to the webinars and how people will be invited. So I saw that they'll be advertised on social media, but the only people I could see were going to be kind of specifically invited was the transport committee. And I saw that you said you were going to do some kind of targeted advertising to demographics on social media who seldom heard groups. I like that description. That's a good description. But are there going to be any other groups who are going to be specifically invited, any representative groups or charities or anything, to make sure that there is a true good range of people? My concern is that if the primary way of promoting these webinars is through social media, you'll only get quite a slim set of people who tend to follow who are on social media and are interested in local authority activity.
Great, shall I come back, Chair, on that?
Yes, please.
So I might invite Farah to come in on some of it. So on York, we're very interested, obviously, in the connections beyond West Yorkshire. We've as the statutory transport authority for West Yorkshire, we've considered the interventions within, but there's quite a number of connections, actually, as you say, that we can make through the interventions that we're promoting. So rail in particular. And what we need to see east of Leeds in terms of increased capacity around Leeds Station will also help with those connections east to York and beyond. We also see the opportunity around kind of mass transit. So if you're the connection that we're looking at into East Leeds around mass transit, there's the ability for people maybe to kind of be captured if they're currently driving from York or from North Yorkshire, then how we can see how mass transit can have a role in that. So before Christmas, we did kind of brief some of our North Yorkshire colleagues on some of this, and we do work with them closely. But it's certainly one that we should. It's not just York, but many of our kind of hinterland is really important to our economic. It's a really important part of our economic geography. So it's a good point to make. And certainly kind of one we'll look at in the next, in the next iteration as to whether we've kind of captured that sufficiently. The slides, yeah, I'm sure we'll send them through to Khaled. Appreciate it was small. I was trying to give you more of a flavour of what's there to tempt you to go and have another look, but more than happy to share. The webinars, anybody and everybody is able to attend. So what we're looking for in terms of the format is a number of presentations, so to try and give people a flavour of what's in the various documents, and then the ability for Q&A for people to be able to interact through through that way. I might just bring Farah in now though to talk about the promotion of them, if I may, Farah.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question. So in terms of the webinar promotion, Liz is correct that we've promoted heavily on social media, and we've also reached out to various distribution lists and using our stakeholder mapping exercise that was done at the start of the engagement to reach out to a range of groups, including education, healthcare, business, our neighbouring councils, accessibility groups, etc. So we've done that through sort of emails to those stakeholders and asking our known disseminators to distribute through their networks, as we know that other organisations have means of reaching wider networks alongside of us. In terms of the webinars, as Liz said, we invite everybody and anyone to come along, and there'll be the opportunity to ask questions at the end, and we'll also provide sort of links back to all of the engagement material, which is hosted on our digital engagement platform, Your Voice. And in terms of the sort of the seldom heard groups, again, yes, we're reaching out to organisations that we know might be of interest through our stakeholder lists, and we're also sort of developing new ways for those groups to be able to have feedback. So one of the reasons to sort of run these webinars was that we know that people may find them more sort of accessible and engaging rather than completing our sort of survey in the more traditional methods. So we're really looking to expand the ways people can participate using the webinars, using polls, using our interactive map, and just having a range of options there.
Thank you.
I just ask about
Jeff, hold on a minute. With people who've been in the queue, I think.
Oh, sorry.
Stephen first, then it's Dot, and it's Christine, and then it's you, Jeff, at the end of the queue. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes,
Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. A quick question. Thank you for that, Liz. You mentioned smart ticketing being part of the ambition. I know that Transport for the North had a smart ticketing program that sadly the plug has been pulled on the government funding for that. I just wondered if there was any interdependency between the Transport for the North work and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority work on smart ticketing. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, we were hoping that the Transport for the North project would deliver benefits here. So obviously now that that's not going to continue, I mean, I think, yeah, pretty much the entirety of the programme has been stopped by government. We are really keen, though, to pick up that conversation with government directly. So the National Bus Strategy this week talked about ticketing. We also understand, and we're waiting for further information about the rail review that Keith Williams ran, and we understand that ticketing is part of that. So we are hoping that there is that the government understands the integration of ticketing rather than seeing it kind of modally siloed, and that's something that we can help with. So we are, I suppose, seeking to work with government and to see what funding we can be able to secure to help us deliver locally on ticketing. And we're already doing some. I'm not sure if the committee has seen, but we are doing some quite innovative things, well, as far as we can around ticketing. I'm not sure if you've had an update on that, but we are looking at an app that's basically trying to integrate campus and rail. So Khaled, I don't know if we've shared some information on that, but happy to share something afterwards with what we're already trying to do on ticketing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dot, it's you next.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I've got a few little points really. One is about increasing reliability of public transport. It's a huge issue, and a lot of people. I mean, it doesn't encourage people to use public transport, if they go and wait for their bus only to see it disappearing off into the distance because it's arrived early, or doesn't come at all and they're sat there in the cold and the rain and the wet and all the rest of it. So if anything can be done to sort of increase the reliability of buses, that would be really useful. There's a scheme in Manchester, in Greater Manchester. It's badges that say, please offer me your seat. They're designed for people with invisible disabilities. It would be, I'm sure, very, very helpful for people who need to sit down, but their reason for sitting down is not obvious. So, I mean, if somebody with a balance problem, for example, doesn't necessarily look any different to anyone else, but their ability to stand up on a bus is decidedly diminished. So, you know, if that sort of scheme could be looked into as well, that would be really useful. I don't think it would be a desperately expensive one, but it could be incredibly beneficial and encourage more people to use buses again. Timetables at bus stops seem to have disappeared completely. Now, I understand there's a cost behind those, but downloadable PDFs aren't accessible to everyone. So if that could be investigated and see if at least some of those could be brought back. I mean, even if it's not every bus stop, then at least some bus stops, you know, sort of in the vicinity, that would be very helpful. And what was the other thing I was going to mention? Yeah, ticketing's always already been mentioned. Sort of more usability, things like options to buy day tickets on the under 25M card. There isn't one at the moment, and the real-time tracking system needs a lot of work, I think, to improve it so it actually works on all buses, not just on some. But yeah, there's quite a little list of things to consider to add to your already extensive list, I'm sure. So thank you.
And are you able to answer all those, Liz, now? Or do you want to answer some of them?
Well, just to say thank you for the list. Reliability is really crucial if we're going to encourage people to switch from car to bus. So completely understand that, and that's why some of the bus map and the interventions that we're looking at will think through how we can provide that reliability. Some of the things, I think I've heard of the Manchester scheme. We'll have a look at that, and I'll pass it on to some of our kind of colleagues. And I mean, on ticketing, why don't we come back to you with what we are doing and what we're hoping to do next, Chair, if that's right, because that kind of was from the previous one. And I think on real time, I think we've got better, but recognise that sometimes there's still those instances. I think, I don't know if you obviously you may not have been out as much, but the information now also enables you to see kind of how full or not the bus is as well. So we have made some we made some improvements around that technology. So yeah, but happy to come back particularly on the ticketing, and this is all great feedback, and we're capturing this for our engagement plan as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I think this is the agenda for the first meeting of the Transport Scrutiny Committee, isn't it? Christine?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, please. My first one relates to the consultation itself, and I think the facilities you have online, the interactive map, etc., are fantastic. But I'm just wondering whether does the group, the seldom heard from groups, include people who don't have access to the internet? Now I'm thinking as well, particularly, and without stereotyping, there's a lot of elderly people use public transport, and without stereotyping, I mean, there will be a high proportion of them who either don't have access to the internet or not familiar with webinar, etc., etc. How will you ensure that they have access to the consultation in the same way that anybody else would? And my second question is in relation to the sustainability of, implementation and sustainability of all these different modes of transport being connected. I'm assuming that each mode of transport will be operated by separate private companies. So in order to implement and maintain connectivity between them, that will require
an awful lot of coordination and cooperation between them. So what will be in place to ensure that that cooperation and coordination continues? So we don't want, say, for example, the whole system to be set up, and then a couple of years down the line, one of those companies deciding that, say, for example, a particular bus route, in their view, is no longer viable, pulling that route, and the whole connection and the whole connectivity falls apart, because it's all going to be interdependent, isn't it? The whole, you know, the whole outcome of it is interdependent on various companies. So we need to ensure that they are going to be able to deliver on that in a sustained way. Thank you.
Thank you. Two really good points. I'll ask Farah to come back to your first point. On your second question, it's a really interesting one and a really timely one, actually, in terms of the ability for us to work with operators to influence and to negotiate what kind of services look like. So the National Bus Strategy, as mentioned, that was published this week, talks about local transport authorities moving towards what's called an enhanced partnership. This is with an expectation that this is that we have in place what's called a bus improvement plan, which sets out what it is we want to see and is used as a way to work with operators about what we want to see delivered. So that's a kind of a step towards our kind of greater relationship with the bus operators. We've obviously already got the Bus Alliance, but this is a kind of a further step towards cooperation. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes in terms of what we're able to deliver for passengers through that. I think in terms of rail and rail integration, as I have mentioned, we're still waiting for government's view on the future structure of the rail industry, because obviously with franchising being taken over during COVID and government basically stepping into that and taking kind of control back, there is still a question about whether the rail industry changes that they're proposing, how far there will be devolution within that, and what our role will be to help determine kind of services and therefore integration with what we're trying to do locally. I think on mass transit, there's still a long way to go in terms of the work that we're doing to establish it. But there's certainly, if you look at what other places have done, we are trying to learn lessons from elsewhere. You know, they do, even if they don't operate directly, the other combined authorities, the other transport authorities, specify what it is they want. And so therefore that gives them greater control over their mass transit systems. So it's a good question because it differs on the different modes, and I think that's our challenge, is to how we get that integration when we have different levers at our disposal. So it's a kind of live challenge, I think, that we all want to see our way through, but there's work to go on that. Farah, do you want to just come back in on the first point?
Yes, of course. I think that's a really real challenge, and definitely something that we've encountered a lot over the last year of running consultations, where we traditionally have both a sort of in-person and a digital element. And it has been a real risk in running all consultations of the last year to primarily focus on this sort of digital first approach. There are a few ways that we aim to mitigate that. So first of all is to use a range of promotion methods. So of course the materials are primarily online, but we promote via a range of methods, and that includes press releases and media. So I know that there is some upcoming work to focus more on local media, so that should help spread the word. And then obviously, we link to our sort of digital engagement hub, but all of the materials are available on request in printed format, and the survey in printed format, and paper copies. So there are a range of ways you can take part offline. And I think it's also fair to acknowledge that, you know, this is sort of the start of the conversation, and so for future work in this space, hopefully we'll be able to revert back to our more traditional methods and run drop-in events at bus stations and community centres, and have that avenue back to capture feedback soon.
Thank you. We must move on, and perhaps you can ask for questions to be short and answers to be short as well, please. And Jeff, I think you're next now.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Christine Knight has already asked my initial question, so I'll go on to something else. The mass transit plans. I think there's a possibility that people will think that they're particularly Leeds-centric. How can we make press on, the powers that be, that really mass transit, and particularly the new, whether they're trams or whatever they're going to be, needs to be surfacing the whole of West Yorkshire and not just the Leeds area?
Quite right. Jan, solve that problem. Who's going to answer that one?
I'll be brief, because the work we're doing does cover all of West Yorkshire. And I suppose we're really keen to hear from the whole of West Yorkshire then back in terms of whether we've got that right. So the more people who we can respond and who can engage in the plans is really important. We do recognise that mass transit is about serving where the greatest number of people travel, because that helps to drive the demand and helps the commercial viability of any kind of new system. But certainly, if the map covers West Yorkshire, and happy to hear if we've missed anywhere.
Thank you. It's a good point, because I have lots of contacts in Bradford, and that's how they see it as well. Perhaps speak to the same people. James, I think you were next, and then it's Dot.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. Just in terms of looking at areas which are scoring higher on kind of multiple indices of deprivation, are we looking at that down to like MS medium super output area as well as just ward level? Because in the past there's been some funding that's been allocated on ward level, and then like the transport links have stopped at the ward boundary because the ward next to it hasn't qualified for it, and they don't necessarily always take into part connectivity. Will we get access to the new census data that's been done this year? Because obviously the old census is now pretty out of date, and we're going to get updated information for transport planning from that. And finally, are we looking at the future in terms of 5G and smart city technology for transport planning as well? Thanks.
Liz, I guess.
Thank you. Let me come back to you on that. I'm not sure in terms of the level of detail we've gone to, but this is trying to give us a picture of where the need is. We're not necessarily then going to base our funding decisions on the level of detail that we've gone into around the indices of deprivation. I think it does go down to greater level of granularity. I'm not quite sure what we've shown on the map, but I can kind of ask about that. Smart cities is a really good one. Our future mobility strategy tries to get into this a little bit in terms of how we can make the most of future technology. We have been working with stakeholders last year to try and understand again the kind of what the industry is doing. But always, well, if there are things you think we're missing, then always welcome to hear about them, because it's we do try and keep up to date with what's going on. Sorry, I didn't write down your middle question.
The census.
Oh, the census. Thank you. I hope so. I mean, the census is very much based. Many of our modelling assumptions are based on future census data. So I'm sure our research and intelligence team will have access to it as they have in the past. I'm not an expert, but it'll be interesting to see what this census data looks like, given we're still in the middle of a lockdown. There we go.
Thank you. Dot, then David, and that's all the hands I've got. Dot again.
Thank you, and there's Betty as well.
Oh, sorry, Betty.
It was. I forgot to ask one little question in my little list earlier, and that's about non-profitable routes and what's going to be done to support them, and tying that in with late night buses as well, which aren't necessarily terribly profitable, but are incredibly vital, particularly if people are working late shifts and so on. So yeah, it's about sort of making sure that places that aren't necessarily on a bus route that would get full don't miss out and have no buses at all because of that. Thank you.
Liz again.
It's a good challenge in terms of what we do next. The funding, again, the National Bus Strategy set out not just the governance approach for how they want us to work with operators, but does start to talk about the funding available, but it's not as specific around what that's going to look like for us, for then how we can particularly this transition from coming out of COVID into recovery and beyond, because we all recognise, even when social distancing does hopefully is removed, we recognise that not everybody's going to come back to bus straight away. So the issue around profitability is a really live one, and that's why I think this bus improvement plan that government wants us to put in place will then be used as part of the conversation with them about where funding comes from. So it's really important for us to get that right, to be able to make the case, particularly as I say, it's a very live issue, I think, out of COVID, around bus passenger numbers.
Okay, thank you. David, Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Peter, Chair. As obviously just a few observations. I'll be again very quick. Having been into 2 other areas of this country before lockdown, the final lockdown, it's interesting to see in one area, which is the Lake District, the bus network was fantastic. The app worked perfectly. The timing was absolutely spot on, and it was a real pleasure to travel around the Lake District on their buses. Going on to the East Coast was a complete disaster. And so I think it is important that we get this right, because it will encourage people to use buses if everything does work. It isn't an easy task, I realise that, but by really integrating things, it really does encourage people to get onto the buses, because obviously that was the experience. The second thing is looking at, I think the plans you presented today are very much a macro vision for the entire area of the combined authority. But I know, and this is where you do sometimes get a little bit parochial, but I'm sure it does replicate in lots of other areas, and that is a more micro system whereby you've got maybe smaller buses travelling around towns and travelling around, sort of districts. So that does encourage people to go into town centres, not by car, but by getting on a bus, because they know there's a bus going around the town and it will be available. They're not big buses, but smaller buses, medium-sized buses. And I think that needs to ensure that we do get that as well, because I know people are asking us at the moment about, for example, in our area, going to a new leisure facility. And it would encourage certainly a lot more people to use it, particularly of older people, young families, if they knew there was a viable bus going around the town. So I think that obviously does need to be sort of put into the plan as well, that we do have that sort of micro service, as well as the sort of the bigger ones going from one area to another. I think we can't forget the locality of a public transport system. Thanks, Chair.
Well said, thank you. Yes. Betty, sorry I missed you.
Thanks, Chair. No problem. I'll be brief. First of all, Olivia and I attended the Wakefield consultative meeting yesterday, and actually we saw the presentation. Just to come back on a response to Dot, I did bring up yesterday about the issue of shift workers and the timing of buses, or there being no buses to get them back home, particularly in the southeast of the district. And if I just comment on Christine's point, which I fully support, and I was going to actually ask the question myself on the publicity of those people who do not have the IT network of any shape or size. Farah, you said that in response, that obviously you will be looking to, when the COVID situation gets better, community centres and bus stations. One thing I didn't get from the meeting yesterday, and I'll ask the question now and then follow it through with a suggestion. I didn't get from the meeting yesterday what and where and how the consultation time period was going to be. When does it stop? And in response to the other part about you're looking to the bus stations, etc. What is wrong now with the documents being actually produced in and I'll say this with reference and difference to everybody, with a reader user pamphlet to be placed in the buses. We've got these, what did we call them yesterday? Partnerships with other bus companies. What's wrong with getting some of these user-friendly, readable pamphlets on the buses? What's wrong at the moment in getting the same kind of little readable, usable pamphlet in the bus stations? And what's wrong with getting notices in the buses and the bus stations to say that they are there and where they are and when the consultation finishes? I'm a champion in my own way for those people that are expected to know webinars, platforms, you name it out there. That's not the case. That's not the case. And the other part about it is this: it's not just knowing about them, it's being able to afford them in these days. You know, they have to be paid for. So can I ask, when is the consultation going to finish, and why at the moment are you not preparing a user-friendly leaflet inviting people to say what's going on, and if they want further information, is there ability for them to speak to somebody within your organisation for a little chat if they need any further guidance?
Liz again.
Thanks. I might ask Farah to come in on the details. So and the date of the consultation end has just gone out of my head. I think it's the Farah can tell me the date in April. I think we recognise that this period of the engagement, we are still likely to be under the restrictions. So as you say, our ability to meet face to face is likely to be in future phases of the engagement. But Farah, do you want to say a little bit, because I'm sure we are doing things at the bus stations, but do you want to probably a bit closer to the detail now?
Yes, sure. So the date the consultation closes is the 11th of April. We understand that there may be instances where printed material or people request printed material close to the date, and that given the restrictions and our ability to print in our offices, there may be a delay. So we're accepting feedback after this date if that is the case. In terms of printed material at bus stations, again, it was due to the restrictions that were in place when we launched the consultation at January, that this wasn't sort of widely promoted at those areas that were closed. As the bus stations etc. start to open back up, that's a really, really good point, and we'll look into making sure that material is available at those sort of services in the very near future.
May I come back, Chairman?
Go on, Beth, here.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I understand about the bus stations being closed, but the buses have been running and well subsidised from each authority. And I know the capacity has been reduced. That has not stopped any leaflets or pamphlets being placed in those buses that are running, that some people are using. And I think it's a mistake. It should have been done all the time. You can't depend on facilities being open in a COVID situation, but you could depend on those buses and those companies that you have enhanced partnership contracts with, which is supposed to be at an exceedingly good relationship. You could have and should have by now considered putting that leaflets in those buses. And I think I would like to see, Chairman, that from today, where the could have will turn into the will have after today's meeting. And it would also be great, Chairman, if from Liz and Farah, that in fact we could actually see that abridged version, the abbreviated version, the friendly user version that's going to go out on these buses and our partners, and what other information posters could be put up. And I'd love to see a sample being sent to Khalid, and I don't want to increase the workload again on Khalid, but I would love if we could see that and if it could be sent out to us. And being as it's something that I think could be really useful, I'd expect to see that pretty soon, Chair.
That was a resolution, I'd be seconding it. Yes, thank you very much indeed. Yes, have you got that? You're going to circulate that information, presumably,
so we
through the office?
We can definitely take that away in terms of, particularly in terms of the posters. I think I'm not as clear on the ability to do leaflets in terms of being COVID secure, because we're trying to minimise, I suppose, the number of kind of touch points that people might have either on buses or in bus stations. So if we let us take that away as to whether that sits well with our COVID secure arrangements.
And can you make sure that Councillor Rhodes is included in this and is kept up to date? Because this is the practical real world of public transport. It's not the theory of what it's going to look like in 2040. Any more questions on the connectivity infrastructure plans? We note report. I hope all these points have been fed back, aren't they? The points that have been made in the debate this last half hour will go through to the appropriate officers at the Combined Authority.
Yes, and this is part of our engagement. So the notes of the meeting we can feed into the team who are writing the engagement report as well, so they can be captured formally. So thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you. I think that closes that subject. We've just two other things to do. Item 10 is the scrutiny work programme, which, Colin, is not as easy to do as it has been in the past, because we don't know who will be working and when they start again. So do you want to say anything on this?
Yeah, very briefly. So the main thing is the next meeting, which should be the last meeting of this committee, is in May. I'm sorry, I'm just getting the paper. May the 21st. Obviously, that's after the mayoral election, but before, or rather during, annual council season. So the current membership would remain for that final meeting. Currently on the agenda, the only thing we have is the annual report, which is a standard item. We have a mayoral update. And the usual corporate performance item, and that's it. The one thing I'd suggest, perhaps something for this group of members to think about, is a work program handover. Something I'm working on as well, but it's generally suggestions for the new committees can look at within their remits once those have been finalised. I suppose we could do an update on finalised or near finalised arrangements on the new scrutiny system. But something this group of members could do is sort of pass on a handover work programme to the new committees. In particular, the reviews which we did, or were halfway through last year, that were aborted due to COVID and we haven't been able to pick back up this year. So they were on business grants and climate change. Obviously, if next year we have more committees that are one that's more focused on the economy, one that has an environmental focus, we could pass them on to those committees. And there are other issues that the committee has looked at, this committee has looked at in the past, like excuse me, apprenticeships, colleges, skills, business grants, flooding, all those things. It'd be good to have a look at them and see if there's anything that needs to be left behind or passed over. So that's the first point, and maybe the working group chairs might want to say something soon. But the other point I'd make is the remote meetings. At the moment, these meetings are remote because the government has allowed them through law. But I'm not sure what the future about that is. What the exact? I personally haven't heard anything about whether or not that law is going to be renewed beyond May. I think it expires in May on the election day around then. So I don't know about that. So I'm not sure exactly what the future is. Because obviously our next meeting is in May. It's at the end of May. I don't know if Angela might know more, but just something to think about. And I suppose I'll let you know, or we'll let you know.
Angela?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, you're right. The legislation that allowed virtual meetings was put in place last year along with the election legislation, and an end date was put on the 7th of May. Clearly, COVID hasn't changed sufficiently. The restrictions are still here. So we're working through our options after the 7th of May, but technically it may not be possible to hold a virtual meeting. There are a number of people working on options about whether we can hold, whether there is space either within our premises or other premises where meetings could be held. People are also looking at whether actually the interpretation of how that legislation operates does allow some wriggle room to enable these sorts of meetings to continue. We will clearly have a position well ahead of the 7th of May, and we will advise you accordingly. It is challenging. This is a particularly challenging meeting for May because there's a large number of us, and social distancing is still in place. It needs a very large space to hold the meeting, and that also presumes that you are all comfortable at coming into a real meeting. So we are looking at what our options are, whether there is any way to do a hybrid or continue a virtual discussion rather than have to have it in person. But we are looking to obviously try to comply with the legislation and hold a meeting that is valid. So we'll report back ahead of the 7th of May date.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Khaled. I think that's about the end of the meeting. Just finish with what I said earlier on. If you can persuade your leaders to nominate you again for the Combined Authority, we would very much appreciate it. Your experience and knowledge mustn't be wasted. We must have you worked at the very least to dilute the effect of all the new people who are going to come in with months of learning before they can get to your level. So twist arms where you can, and I'll help you if letters would help. But we do hope to see you all again in 2021-22. End of meeting. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.